let's go through. So now let me go through it. Push this here, push this here, push this here, right there. Okay. Okay, so now yesterday I think we went through an example where we were declaring a variable, but we were not using use state. So the way to think about it, about state, basically, so this application that we have, our app.jsx, has some internal state, something it's going to use, some piece of state that it wants to use at a particular time during the life cycle of that application. So we want to use this state to do something in our application. Now, the difference between doing this, like having a use state, and doing this, I think this is maybe the best way to explain it. My bool. And then I set this to false. This is still valid JavaScript, right? Because essentially, this is still like a piece of state, some information that exists within our function app. And we have this as well, right? So essentially, if you look at this for the first time and you don't know what use state is doing, like they look the same, like the values are the same. Both of them are false. So why could we not instead use my bool instead of using the use state hook? And we did an example yesterday, and we saw that the main difference is when you use state. So just think about it like at a very high level. It's just a piece of information that your application is going to need at some point. During the life cycle of the application, it's going to need some information to maybe change the behavior of the UI. That's it. It's simply some piece of information that the app is going to use to change its behavior. Okay. Now, the difference between my bool and this thing where we have the use state hook is the use state hook knows how to tell React to re-render the UI. This does not. If you try to, like we did yesterday, if you try to change this value with a function, if you said you have a function called change my bool, and then you set this to an arrow function, and then within this, we'll change this to let, then say my bool is equal to true. This would work. If you call this function at any point, if you have a button that calls change my bool, it's going to change this value from false to true. It is actually doing something. It's changing it from false to true. But it will not, if you are using this false to show something on the UI, for example, to change the color of this circle, it would not work because there is a separation between JavaScript and the UI. So normally when you do vanilla, you have to do things like document.getElementById. You have to do that whole DOM manipulation thing. You have to traverse the DOM to change elements of the DOM. Now, when you're doing it this way, without having the use state, it's just JavaScript. It has not registered to the UI, the DOM, right? That it needs to update the UI. That is the whole point of use state. Use state knows that the data we have is reactive, first of all. By reactive, I mean it's going to change at some point, and when it does, update the UI if you have to. That's the only difference. Because if you use this, it will not work. So use state, because you have to remember there's three things here. Okay, there is the DOM, okay, the thing that is responsible for rendering the tree. So your elements on the page. So let me make this bigger and then I will open terminal. So going to elements, here is your DOM. Here it is. So this is your DOM. So when you normally do vanilla development, if you want to target the DOM, then you use document.whatever. That's how you do it. It's very straightforward. But obviously, as your application becomes bigger, then it becomes very tedious to do that. You're going to have a lot of document dot something something. So now with React and all these other frameworks, what they do is they give you a way to manipulate the DOM without having to go through that entire process. And one way they can do that is you can have a reactive piece of state, a reactive piece of data. That's what we mean when you put something within used state. It simply means when we change that reactive data, do something to the UI, tell the DOM to update. That's what you are doing. So is there something I need to explain further hapo, ama is it a bit more clear? Like the point of use state. So first of all, don't even look at this, just look at the overall thing, like const is clicked, set is clicked, use state. So state is some reactive piece of information. Now, we've done JavaScript. So we know anytime you see parentheses, you're calling a function. So right here, so I did say that it's a function that returns an array. So use state is a function that returns an array. That is what it is. This use state right here is going to return an array. Okay, so let's try and actually see it in action. So let's remove this. Might break it, but I think let me just do another one. Let me do another state, because if I replace this, we'll need to do some manipulating down here as well for is clicked. Now I want to quantify this statement that use state is a function that returns an array. This section returns an array. So let's create another one, const of data is equal to use state, and set this to don't know, like true. Okay. Now, if this statement is true, when we console log piece of data, because you can see there's a difference in terms of syntax, what we should see back is an array. That is what we should see, an array. So let's console log piece of data. There it is. Now this is console ninja, so I'll also look at it in the console. You can see right here, it's an array. Now, if you take a closer look, you will notice the array has two elements. The actual value we gave it, so the initial value, and something with an F. So anytime you see an F in JavaScript, that's a function. This is a function. So the use state hook is returning an array that has two elements, the actual state and a function, a setter function. So this function is responsible for changing this state. That is what this function is for. And the reason it's designed that way is because we are using functional programming. And if you remember the class we had on functional programming, one of the things with FP is immutability. That is one of the things. Now, you can see it's returning an array, right? True and a function. Now, let's look at what we are doing on line 10. What are we doing? We are destructuring. We're doing array destructuring because we know within this use state, we have the state itself. So this you can give it any name, but the convention is you do something like this. And then the setter function also has a similar name with settings in front of it. So what we can actually do now, we can just destructure the value because we know we are getting back an array. Then what we can do instead of doing this, because now we would need to do piece of data and then get the first index in the array, the first element. So let me do that first. We know it's an array. Let's get the first one. You can see it's true. So if you want to get the function, what would we do? We select 1 now. So now the second index. But to avoid all that we can do is we can just destructure the array itself. So we can simply place this with an array, then simply set this to piece of state, the name of the state itself, because remember it's an array with 2 elements. Then this can be set piece of state. So if you console log state, you will see true. So now we don't have to do square brackets and then the index, because we destructured the thing. That's what we did. And then if we console log set piece of state, that's a function. That is a function. DOE, dispatch set state. This is a function. And here's the truthy value. So let me just clear the terminal so that you can see it a bit better. I'll just refresh the page. So here is the piece of state, and here is the setter, the function. It is. So is that clear? Is what we are doing with this line down here? Let me remove this for now. Is this clear now? Is this making sense? Why we are doing the destructuring and what is coming back?
Yes.
Clear. Okay.
For me, it's still not clear
Mm-hmm.
because I'm wondering then,
Mm-hmm.
is it always an array or can it be a different type of, a different data type?
So the function always returns an array. That's why you can always destructure on anything. The value you put here can be anything, any primitive data type, but it always returns an array. Okay, the thing, so again, this goes back to functional programming. You have the thing that it returns does not change. So we can always tell that anytime you use state, you know for sure you're going to get back an array. So this will not change. So even if I come here and I give it an object now, an empty object, let's say, let's give it like is state with the value. If I console log piece of state, I should see the object. It's right here. You can see it's the object, but the object is inside of an array. So the use state always returns an array. I'm trying to remember what pillar of functional programming this is. I can't remember. Can anyone remember? It basically means your use state will always return the same thing, regardless of the input you give it. It's always going to return an array, always. So, go ahead if you have.
Yeah.
Okay. I was saying, in functional programming, we try as much as possible not to mutate data.
Yes.
So I think the concept you are trying to enforce about the use state returning an array is about immutability. Like the data remains the same way it is, and that's why we are destructuring it, because we confidently know that it's an array, whether we use it in any way. Like if we want to return an object, an array of an array, it will always be an array.
Yeah.
And we don't need the whole array, so we destructure the components that we need.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was about functional programming.
So it is immutability. I think we'll have a look at it towards the end maybe. But the thing to remember is it will always return an array, regardless of what you give it as a data type right here. So if we do the thing we had done before again, if I remove the destructuring and I give it now a variable name, the thing that comes back will still be an array. Look can see. It's still going to be an array. You can see again right here. It's still an array. Let's check in the console. You can see it's still an array. The difference is now the first value is no longer what we had initially, which was, I think, a Boolean value. It's now an object. But the second, the element in this position is still a function. So, Catherine, to your question, it always returns an array, regardless of the data type you give it. Do you have another question or anybody else?
Thank you.
You okay?
Yeah, I understand it now. Thank you.
So now let's remove this. Let's remove this. So if anybody asks you, why are we using use state, right? Instead of using a normal, just a normal variable that you can define normally, like what I did initially, like const bool or let bool. It's because, yes, if you try to change it, it will work. JavaScript will actually change the value, like what I had initially. It will actually change it. The only difference is it's not reactive. Like it doesn't know it's supposed to update the DOM. So if you have a function that changes this value from true to false, it will change, but you will not see the edits on the UI. Now, useState knows about the DOM. So it can be able to, anytime we get some changes in the reactive data, then what do? Update a piece of the UI. That's what it does. Just update something in the UI. Okay. Any question regarding state? Any question? Okay, so that is state. That is what state is. Now, props. Now, a prop, right? So, for example, our circle. Let's go to the circle, component right here. Okay. Now, this syntax right here, is anybody confused by this? This thing right here. This thing where we have curly braces and then it's clicked. So to be able to like let's go back, like talk about props first of all. So I will not destructure. I will simply do props here. Okay, I will not destructure it. I will simply do props. Now, I believe I also now need to do props dot. Is that correct? No, let's walk through it pole until it makes sense. So let me go back to, let me create a new one. Now let's just use this one. So a prop, right, is something that you can pass to a component, like a property. You pass down, like think about normal HTML elements. Let's look at an example of a normal HTML element. Do we have even this right here? This is an attribute, right? So the div takes in an attribute. For example, class name. You can give it a class name. You can also give it a style attribute. You can style it directly, Harper. Right? You can do that in normal HTML. Now, with JSX, with React, your components, they behave like elements, like HTML elements. You can see even the syntax looks similar, except, first of all, they start with a capital letter, right? And they don't always have to have an opening and a closing tag. They can be self-closing. Like the way you have like a break in HTML. In HTML, you can have something like this. You can have BR. That is a self-closing element. So in React, right? If you want to have your own custom like elements, because they do look like elements, right? you can do it this way, and then you import them, obviously. And the convention is they should start with capital letters, because again, you don't want to confuse the two between normal HTML elements and React. That's why for React, they are always capitalized. They start with a capital letter. Now, the way to think about this is clicked is the same way you can think about an attribute, right? Some extra information about that element. Maybe the element needs something else. So in the case of divs, a div can have a class name, right? Div can have a style. So our circle can either not have anything, it can be that way, right? Or it can have some properties, some extra things it needs to be able to work correctly. So those things are what we call props. If you go back to the circle, right, the prop itself is needed to change the color of the circle. So the prop, this right here, this prop is an object, brings back an object. So I'll just do it right here. I think what I can do is I can remove this. I will remove this. And I'll simply pass props here. And now we are, I don't know why it's refusing to give me props here, but let's walk through it. I will first of all comment this out. Okay, see? And I'll just return a div with nothing. Okay, or just do paragraph. Okay. Now, these props, right? What is happening is in our app.jsx, when we render the circle, we are giving it a prop called isClicked. So our components take in props, like parameters, a parameter called props. It can be anything. You can name it anything. It doesn't have to be called props, but this is a convention because obviously you are expecting something. Think about normal functions. You can have a normal function called add that takes in 2 numbers. So components in React take in the prop object. So if I come back here and I remove this, because we are not using any TypeScript. So if I remove this, we should not get any complaints. We go back to circle. Within this function circle that has a props parameter, if I come here, I do console log props. See, it's an array, sorry, an object, but it's empty. There's nothing there. But if I go back to my app.jsx, right? So let's say the prop that I need is dynamic. It changes depending on some behavior on the parent component, like we are done. So the behavior of the isClicked state changes based off of the clicking, which is in the button. So anytime you click the button, it changes the state from false to true. So this can be anything. I can give it, for example, color, then set this to pink. I go back to my circle, you will see I have an object with the color pink. If I remove it, if I remove the color pink, we still have the object, but it's empty. So I can have as many as I want. I can have color, set that to pink. I can have size, set that to large. I can have, what else do we have? I think let's try with those ones first. If I go back to circle, you can see now my object has 2 properties, a color property and a size property. So when we were doing the initial example, when we had curly brackets here, we were destructuring the object because we know again for a fact that the props is always going to be an object. So we can destructure the object. Now, we know we are passing down two props. Someone has a question.
Yes, I do.
Mhm.
But there's a bit there that's a bit confusing. You've said that we know that the props is always going to be an object.
Yes.
Is this in reference to React, or is it because that now we are referencing an object for this particular case?
No. That's actually, again, this goes back to functional programming. The idea of immutability and always getting the same things back. So the way the React library is, right, all your functional components accept the props argument. All of them, hata iko hapa juu. Even this one where we have app, even this one can have a props. But this thing that you pass in here as a prop is always going to be an object. So it is React, but at the same time, the fact that you can always tell what is coming back is FP. That's functional programming. We know that we are always, the props argument is always going to be an object, always, just like our use state is always going to return an array. So it's not something that we can change. You cannot change the behavior so that the props is now something else. And it makes it very easy to work with it now, because you know for a fact that if you have a component and you pass the props, the thing is going to be an object for a fact. So it's not, it's part of FP, functional programming, that the data is, someone has a question or a comment. Someone's hands was raised. Nani?
Okay, I also used to struggle with props, and this is the trick I use to understand them. So props, they come from, the word props is just a short form of properties. So in JavaScript, objects contain key and value pairs, and that's what it's called a property. So if you want to understand props, take them like the key value. So like example, can you go back to the app.jsx, please? So you see like in let's take an example of the circle. Color equals to pink. So in an object, we are initializing the color to pink. When you write an object, you will say color colon pink, right? So when it comes to props, it's the same thing. This is a property. The color is equals to pink. It's a property because it is following that convention. Once you understand this from an object perspective, it becomes easy. That's how I understood props. Yeah.
Who else wants to? Thank you, Ruben. Who else wants to? Who else wants to give it a shot at explaining?
From the way I'm trying to understand, is that the reason why React first states it as a property, but only accepts it as an object, is because it's so that we can be able to destructure the object. That way, we are able to use it across our application in different ways. Does that make sense?
Well, it could also have been an array, because we can also destructure an array. So it's not really like in terms of the type of data type, because it could have been an array, and we could also have been able to destructure it. So go ahead.
So is the point then to destructure so that you can use its properties in different parts of your application?
Yes, because now we are assuming our circle needs some of these props, some of the, for example, the color. So we are assuming that our hello requires some extra information that it does not have, but that information is maybe available in app.jsx. So the way to give that piece of information to Circle is to pass it as a prop. So you pass it down from the parent, you pass it down to the child, because the child doesn't have that information. The person that has that information is the parent. So you pass it down to the child, and now the child can now use it wherever it wants to use it. So in terms of this being an object, I think it's just the smart way to do it, because it makes sense. If someone has a bunch of properties, so if we keep passing in stuff here, it would not make sense to have this thing come back as a string, right? It would not make sense to have props as a string, because it would mean you'd have to, like, the dynamics of dealing with all those properties is way more verbose. Yani ni kazi mingi, it's extra work. So instead of using any other data structure, just group everything into an object, all the props, everything that is being passed down, group it as an object. And then now when you come to Circle, right, you can either destructure it, or you can just do, because we know it's an object, you can do hello, then we have this, then you can do props dot color. You can see we have hello pink, because we know props is an object. Okay, we know props is an object. So we can also do props dot size, right? Now to avoid this extra overhead of props dot everything, that's why you destructure. That's why here now, instead of having props, you just have the destructuring. And then you destructure the names of your properties, color and size. So you come here and say you want color, you also want size. Now if you come here and you remove this, see, okay, this is what I have not removed. Be hello large. If I change this to color, hello pink. If I keep adding more props, I add another one here, like is large to true. I go back to my Circle. If I want that again, I just have to destructure it. Upper just is large. Then I can get it now here. Is large. Low true. Is it making sense? Does anyone else want to take a crack at it? Catherine, is it a bit less confusing?
And I understand it well now.
Okay. Anyone else who wants us to go through it? Okay. So now I believe this should make sense, this here. Because up to this point, you see what we've been doing, we've just been passing like string values. Pink, large is large. If you want to pass in some JavaScript, again, you go back to the way you normally do it when you want to render some JavaScript. You simply pass in your curly braces, and then you give it some information. So the only difference between what we have here, color, curly braces, is this is clicked is now a state. And size large was just like a normal string value. So you can also have just another value here, my bool is equal to true, and just set this to my bool. We have the brackets because we are now passing in some JavaScript. Anybody who is lost? Okay, so I'll go back to the code we had initially. Hopefully this is making sense now, why we have the destructuring here and why we also have the destructuring here in use state. Use state returns an array, so we destructure the array. Circle, the props are going to be an object, so we destructure the object. You can see the syntax is different. We don't have square brackets here now, we have curly brackets here and here. And then we can now pass that information down to whoever needs to use it. So let me just undo. Back to what we had. Okay, so now this should make sense now. This code should make sense. Let's go back to app.csx and try to think about it. So I will remove, what did we call it here? Is clicked. So we don't want size anymore. We don't want is large anymore. We just want is clicked. Is called is clicked. So that when we go to circle.jsx, we can just destructure that name. If you change this name to something else, then you have to change the name here as well. The name of the prop. And then the name of the prop is the same as this state is clicked. They don't have to be the same. But this is clicked is the prop name, and this is the state itself, which is this. So let's walk through what is going on with the circle right here. Is clicked is passing down the false value at first. So when you run the application, the state is false, right? So now when we come to our function, our component, right here, what we are doing is, so first of all, because we know we are going to use some JavaScript in the class name, right? First of all, we have the curly braces. And just like normal JS, anytime you want to include a string and some JavaScript, you normally have backticks. So you want the circle class to always be there. And if we check the CSS file, app.css, the circle class simply has a width of 100 pixels and a height of 100 pixels and a border radius of 50%. So that's what we are doing here. We are saying the circle class should always be there. And then the next class, right? You can see we have a $sign. And then now we want to consume we want to do some JavaScript. So we want to have a string value, but we also want to have some JavaScript functionality. Is clicked, remember is clicked is a prop. It's coming from app.csx. And by default, it's false. Okay, so what it does, it checks. What we're doing is we are checking if is clicked is true. Okay, I was doing some animations. So let me remove this. I'll just leave it because we'll go through it again. But basically the logic is if is clicked is true. So when we click this button and the state changes to true, I want to add a class called bounce ball. So if I go back to my app.css, if I have another class here called bounce ball, right? So now what should happen is when our state changes when our state is true, when is clicked is true, we should add the bounce ball class to our div. When it's false, don't do anything. That's for the class. For the style, again, we are using the is clicked. again, we are using a ternary operator, the background color. So remember, we mentioned some differences between JSX and HTML. Another one is your property names, right? So in CSS, it's normally background dash color. So you simply replace them with camel case. Anything that has a dash is replaced by camel case. Anything that has more than one word. So background color, we want to set background color to be either pink or green, depending on the value of is clicked. So if is clicked is true, the background color should be pink. If it's false, the background color should be green. And that's why by default, the background color is green, because the initial state is false. But when we click on this button, it's now a different color. Why am I getting errors? What did I do? I think this is from earlier. So I'll refresh the page again. Yeah. So the color is changing from green to pink because now is clicked is true. And if I come here, let me console log is clicked, the value. Then I will do a refresh of the page so that it resets again. So you see it's false, right? So the logic that is going to be consumed here is it's going to check is clicked. If is clicked is true, then give me pink as the background color. If it's not, give me green. So right now, is clicked is not true. So the background color is green. But when we change the value, this condition will now be met. So the background color will change to pink. So I click this, you can now see it's true. So now the background color changes to pink. Is that making sense? Like why we are getting a different background color and how that is working? Anybody who has a question? Okay, so let's showcase this. So when is clicked is true, we want to have a circle class and a bounce ball class as well. So we can just inspect this from our DOM, going to root, going to app, right here. Just observe this area. I will refresh the page. Okay, then I will open it up again. You can see by default, we just have a circle class, right? Remember what the logic is saying. Anytime is clicked becomes true. Okay, you can see the extra space. You can see this extra space right here is coming from that expression. We're telling it if is clicked is not true, just don't do anything. Just give me an empty space, an empty class. Literally, there's nothing there. And then if this is true, add a bounce ball class to the circle. So observe this area. When I click on this, right? So this button is changing the state from false to true, meaning our condition is now met. So this is true. So now we'll add the bounce ball class to the circle. So click on it. There we go. So you can see now it added the class bounce ball, and it also added the background color to pink because that condition was met. So let's add this bounce ball class up to CSS. Anybody who is lost? Anyone who is lost? Okay, so I just want to have some animation here. I'm seeing once seconds is in out iteration count infinite direction. I don't want direction. I think I can leave it that way for now. And then, so I'm just putting some animation so that when we click on the ball, we want it to bounce a bit on the page. So the name of the animation is bouncing. The duration is 2 seconds. The behavior is in, out. So basically how it animates, then infinite. So don't stop animating, keep animating. And then we can just come and define our animation here at keyframes. So the identifier is the name of the animation, which is bouncing. So they look like media queries. Bouncing. Then at 0%, what do we want? Then at 100%, what do we want? We can use the transform. So we can say transform, translate y-axis by 5%. And then we want actually let's do 0%. Then transform, translate y. Let's make it a bit faster. So obviously it's a bit static. You can see that it's stuttering a bit. We can fix that by adding one more property here. And then I think that should be fine. Okay, now let's refresh the page. Now let's go through the logic. Okay, so this is how you have animations in CSS. So basically at 0%, don't go anywhere, don't transform along the y-axis. And then at 100%, translate by 50%. So you can see it moving by 50% along the y-axis. So top to bottom, it animates on the y-axis. If you wanted it to animate on the y and the x-axis, you can simply add that here. I'm pretty sure we can do a translate x by 20%. We just added an animation, but you can see it's not working because remember, in our circle, we are saying when this is true is when we need to add the bounce ball. Otherwise, don't add it. So now what should happen is when we click the button, this state is going to become true. So we are going to add the bounce ball class, which is going to animate the ball. So click on it, you can see it's moving up and down, and then it's going to the right slightly because of that translate X right here. Then if I click on this, the animation stops. If I click on it again, it starts animating again. Click stop, it stops again. So you can see how we can use props. You can see how we are using props, right? This is clicked to animate the ball. Is it making sense? I hope you're getting it. Does anyone have anything to add? I feel like I've been talking for so long. Joseph, maybe you want to add something, or anyone? Someone has a question, or because I can't see the chat. Let me just check. Okay. Who has a question? I can just... Oh, Catherine, go ahead.
Yes. So I wanted if you could try a different scenario where we still want to maintain the animation, but now on the green color, because it sort of like now flips. It flips everything around. So I wanted to see how can that be done.
What do you mean? What do you mean by flip?
So right now, if you click on the button, it shows the color and the animation, right?
Yep.
But then again, I also wanted that, just click on the button just now. Yes, and then when you click on the button, now the animation stops, but it goes back to green. So can we test a scenario where the green button is also still animating at the same time?
What is animating? The green, the color.
Yeah, the green.
Okay.
Yeah, the green color. Sorry.
Okay, the green color from pink to green, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So for us to do that, let's see. For us to do that, we would need to, no, so that's CSS now, that's not actually JSX. We would simply need to come into the app.css. And then at 0%, we want it to be green. And then at 100%, we want it to be pink. So background color, that should do it. Let's see. Okay, we have not given it the 0%, so we do need to give it this as well, I believe.
Ian, what did you say those percentages represent?
Basically, like how far do you want it to move? You can have it in pixels, you can have it in percentages, you can have it in literally anything. So basically, we want it to move 50% along the y-axis. So just think about this.
The 0% and 100, the one like on 920.
Oh, you mean this?
Yeah.
You mean this?
Yeah.
So animations. So I don't know whether you've ever seen the animation whereby someone is like opening a book very, very fast. Alafu unaona ni kama like someone is walking or something. Like you've ever seen something like that? Like
yeah, I have
seen something like that. Umeona kitu kama hiyo anywhere. Animations are basically frames.
Yeah.
So at a particular point, like what do you want to happen? That's what we are doing at 0%. At 0% frame, don't translate to anywhere. Remain where you are. And then at 100% of the animation, move by 50%. So you can have more than just 2. You can also have 25%. 5%, then we can do something different here. Like again, we can still have the transform. Use this value from 0% to, so here we're doing 50. Let's do 25% on the y-axis. Also, let's do on the x-axis. So now we have added an extra frame. Initially, we just had 2 frames for 0% and for 100%, but now we have an intermediate. So if we animate now, you will see a difference. You can see it's behaving differently now because now we have 3 frames. So the first one is saying remain where you are. And then the second one at 25% is saying translate by 25% on the y-axis, but also translate by 25% on the x-axis. That's why it's moving left, right, left, right, left, right, down, left, right, down, because the last one is translate by 50%, which is lower than 25, and then translate by 20%. So these frames simply mean like how many steps do you want to take? You can have 2 steps, you can have 5 steps, you can have 20 steps. It doesn't matter how many you want. You can have as many as you want.
I get you.
You get it?
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Okay, so let's take it back to where it was. And then to Catherine's question, we also want to animate the color. So you can see now we just have 2 steps. No, I now take it, we also want to animate the color. So at 0%, we want the background color of green. See, because at 0% green, at 100% it's pink. So it's animating both of them. It's changing the colors from green to red, to pink, green to pink, green to pink. And you can have an intermediate again. So you can come here and say at 25%, give me a different color, like black. See. So that is how you would animate that, from to also change the colors as well. Catherine, I hope I answered your question.
You did. At first, I thought you'd need JSX, but thanks for the clarification.
Okay. But is it making sense, like where like props come in, like something like this? Because otherwise we would not be able to add the bounce ball class without the is clicked, unless you do it, you hard code it. But we want it to be dynamic. Because the other thing, like the way to do it, to do this without using JSX or any dynamic code, you just add the bounce ball class directly. It would work. The problem is now it would always animate. It would not be like, there would not be a condition for it to animate. It would always animate. Now it's back. Any question? Is it a bit clearer now, like what is going on? Because today we've focused on the circle for most of the session. Is this making sense? Is there something I need to reiterate again? Anyone with a question? Wekesa, are you okay? Is Wekesa still here? Eunice?
Yes, I'm okay.
You okay?
But I have a question. Okay, a kind of a clarification. Can you go back to the button?
Button, we have not looked at the button.
No, circle. Like when we were clicking the button initially without having the bounce, it only changed the color of the circle to pink. Oh, yeah.
Because we did not have the class, we did not have the bounce ball. It was there, it was adding it, but there was no logic. So it was still adding the class, but there was no logic to it. The class did not exist in the CSS file. Okay, so question. Now, assuming most of us have understood. So what if we also want to, let's see, what can we do to this? Okay, we also want to change the background color, but now we want to change the background color of the app based off of this value. How would we go about doing that? Assuming I will go back to my app.css, and then I will add a new class here called bg new to background color. I have this. So if I wanted to put this as my styling here directly, let me check whether I set a background color. I did not. So if I was to come to app.jsx and give it a class of bg-new, it's black. But we don't want to hard code it. How do we do that using what we just learned? How do we add the bg-new class to our app? based off of the is clicked state. Anyone want to take a crack at it?
I can give it a try.
Okay.
Yeah, we are changing the background of the app.
Yes, app.
Yeah, so where we have the class name, we can do a conditional rendering. So we check if the is clicked state is true or false. So remove the, okay, don't remove, we'll have like curly braces instead of the string. Yeah, and then is clicked and question mark. So if it is clicked, give the class name of, it was what, Virginia or something. Yeah, if it's not, give it a class name of app. That should work.
Everybody agree? This is what we need to do. Let's inspect. So we now have a class of app, but that's because the condition is not being met. It's not true. So we go to the else. So when you click on it, it comes black. But now we have a bug. You can tell me. What did you do wrong?
Hey, yeah.
Hi.
So this class, it's the same one we're using somewhere else, right? I think in
Yes.
our main.jx.
No, we are using it to.
In
We're using
HTML.
it for CSS in the CSS.
Is it not like that because of the, you see, for the .app we have like additional styles, but for the BG new we don't have, we just have the background.
Exactly. So how do we maintain our previous classes, our previous styles, but still change the background color to new?
Okay, you can use, I don't know if this will work, but you can, there's a way we can have both.
The way to think about it is app should not be conditionally rendered. App should always be there.
Yeah.
Yes. So the app class should always be there.
Yeah.
The begin is the one that needs to come in afterwards.
Yeah. So maybe you can try on the BG new, you can try to use like the backticks and have like both in template literals.
Okay, so right here,
right there have the backticks.
Where? Wapi?
Where we have BG new only, just before the colon.
Yeah.
Yeah. And up, so have before BG new have the
Where are
dollar
we
sign.
ending there? Where are we ending the backtick?
Right there. Remove that. Yeah. So before BG new, you can have dollar sign and the curly brace and put in up. Yeah.
Up.
Yeah.
This up, this one here.
Yeah.
As a string. Right?
That's right. Yeah.
As a string, the way it is.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah. Then do the same for BG new. Like have it in the curly braces and the
And then
bg new as a string. So what this means, if the condition is met, it should like maintain all the styles, but the background will change because it is different in bg new.
we still have up.
Okay.
It is working.
Yeah. Should.
Alternatively, you could just have add up as like outside there is clicked. Like the way we did it for circle. Circle is always there, and then the is clicked is the one that is being rendered dynamically. But even this works. Way more code, but it still works.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so that's how you would do it. But I will undo. Then I will leave the code we have been doing all along. So, any question? Are we less confused than we were at the beginning of the session? Is Davis still with us? Davis, are we less confused?
Hey, maybe a small correction. Can you redo what was there?
Okay.
Can you just redo? Bring it back. Or it can't come back.
I've already mentioned point. So you want this, and then have you done backticks, and then let me see if I get a ruby. I don't think so.
There was is clicked.
It's gone. And then there was this, and then
There was is clicked first, then a question mark, then the backticks.
this click was not in Vitro, was it? Then the backticks. Then I think you had $sign. I believe. And then something, and then BGH, right?
Yeah, and then the other side had, I think, up. So, like, I was thinking, like, instead of using those, like the what is it called, ternary operator, you can just have it like a string. You know, like a class is just a string. Like we don't need all that, but just have both of them as strings. That would, like, it's the same thing as what you've written there, but very simple.
So you just have them as strings.
You just have up and bg new as strings. The way you just have the other condition. It's just the same thing.
So we remove the backticks.
Yeah. It's just one string with two words in it. Because after all, the class is just a string, so that should work like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's
and then I also want you to try out something like for the animation, instead of changing the background directly, can you just comment out the background stuff? Because, you know, there are two ways of doing animations. You can use animate, and you can use transitions.
Yeah.
So I guess transitions would be a better pick here. I'm just curious whether it will work though.
Where did
like on the keyframes themselves.
Let's go back to the keyframes.
Yeah. I wanted to test out what if a transition would achieve the same thing.
Okay.
So you can remove from the keyframes, just remove the backgrounds.
And we transition.
Yeah, just
the circle.
transition in the circle. Yeah. You can use that all like might work. I'm not sure. I'm just curious whether it will achieve the same thing. But
That's it, right?
Can give it a time. It also takes maybe 100 ms. Then an easing function. Can you try now? See whether it will like transition smoothly? I can't tell from the video. Is it smooth or is it jumping?
It's smooth.
Maybe exaggerate the time, maybe to like 1 second or something. 1s. I guess a transition could do it too. Okay.
Yeah, working.
Yeah, so basically transitions are also a way of doing animations when you have two different states. Like a good use case would be maybe when you're hovering on a button or when something is active, like you can use the pseudo maybe BTN hover, then you can have a transition on the BTN. So maybe you can change the scale or something. Like it's also a good property to know when you're doing CSS animations.
Yeah.
I was just curious about that.
Okay. Do you have anything you can add on what we've done for props?
Also, basically, you shouldn't really try to like just try to understand it, like what it does and what it is, because we'll be using it like for the next few months. And when we do like sort of a more practical project, you'll see how it comes in when you want to create reusable components. Right now, don't really try to like break your brain trying to understand it, because we'll use it and it's a very key concept in React. You'll use it every day. But if you use it in a sort of a more real world scenario, maybe it will make a bit more sense on what it is. But basically, it's just, as you know, like a component is a function, right? In React, a component is a function that returns JSX. So you can just think of this function like any other function. For example, can you define const sum, like a sum function? The same way that you can say that this function takes in A and B, and it's the same way that in React, functional components take in props by default. Actually, they don't take in anything else. You can't pass anything else into a React component. So in this case, we are passing A and B as two different values, but you can just pass it in as an object. For example, if it's just let's just say numbers, just say, instead of A and B, say numbers. And then now instead of A plus B, you can do numbers.A plus numbers.B. So basically, that's what you would do if you wanted to pass in your parameters as an object. So can you just call the function now? We could just have like A and B, and if you defined it like outside now, you could just pass it in as just one thing. Now that's the same concept with props. the way you would maybe give the parameters of your function to be an object is the same way that the React engineers decided that functional components will take in one parameter, and that one parameter we'll call it props. And you can give it whichever name, but the convention is props. Yeah, so basically that's more or less it. So in this case, if you had defined A and B as maybe const numbers or numbers object is equals to A and B, if you pass it into this function, it would work, because the return statement would take A from numbers and B from numbers. But in this case, because with modern JavaScript, you have that concept of destructuring. So when you destructure it, it even looks like easier. So it's basically the same concept, but it's just that functional components don't return like a number. They will return like a component, like JSX, like markup. Yeah, so that's basically the concept of props, but you shouldn't really struggle to master it. If you've heard of it today, we will deal with it in a more practical sense. And then when we want to make a component reusable, now you'll see where props come in. Yeah, so maybe I can add that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I think we can end now. Anyone with a question?
Just to maybe to add, or not to add, maybe to just support what Joseph has said, trying to understand like the dynamics, or like everything behind how these things work. It can be overwhelming. You can just maybe give yourself time to work with them, like hands-on, and then it just you understand them better that way, and like just trying to get them into your mind directly. They may not work like that. Yeah, and actually, I think recruiters know this is a tricky one for most beginners. I had an interview recently, and that is the first question I was asked, like the difference between state and props. So till get like people will get it with time. Yeah.
Okay, that's nice to hear. Anyone who has anything else to add before we end? Presume that's a no. All right, so I guess we'll see you guys in tomorrow's session, where we will continue talking about. Now we look at events now, and working with events and how they work. Because today we looked at state, but we did not look at the setter function. So we'll look into it tomorrow. Okay, so I hope you guys enjoyed the session, and looking forward to seeing you in tomorrow's session as well. Enjoy your evening, and good night.
Good night.